Workers who got their bosses fired. How? I used to work at a title company and witnessed our department manager forge mortgage documents on a fairly regular basis. So when she went to upper management to throw the entire department under the bus for being behind on recording documents, I marched straight to HR to resign and let them know what she was doing. She was fired and they called me and offered my job back before the week was out. Worked register at a tour company. I also had a manager who fucking hated me for some reason. She was probably the bitchiest person I've ever met. Constantly yelled at us for not reason. Got on to me about answering questions a new hire had. When I was asked. Not her. Wrote down I was 30 minutes late for a shift when I was 2 minutes late. Etc. etc. We had a sneaking suspicion that she was taking money from our tills, as she was always the one who counted down the till when someone got fired for stealing cash. I made it a habit to count down every bill when I gave it back to a customer, because we would get paid docked if we were even $1 off. So if a customer had $23 in change, I'd count 20, 1, 2, 3 in front of them, so I knew I'd given back the right amount. We also had cameras poring at the registers. Well, one day my GM pulls me aside and says $20 was missing from my till and they were going to fire me. I straight up told my boss she could look at the cameras, because I counted out all my bills for customers. Lo and behold, bitchy bitch was the one who counted down my till and got caught on tape pocketing the money. She was gone by my next shift. Fuck you, Jennifer. I won. I had a boss who was skimming off employee hours at Walmart. I took screenshots of my employees' hours on Thursday before the shift started and then screenshots of their hours on Friday that showed that all of them had a couple hours skimmed off their work week. I was a low-level manager, he was an upper-tier manager. He got fired. I believe his motivations was that he wanted to get promoted and wanted to show that he could get more done in less man-hours. Probably would have impacted his bonus too. I had a job that required my supervisor to be doing evaluations of my cases and charts. She just hadn't. In months. She and my director ordered me and my coworkers to do our own chart audits. Fill out the forms. And they would sign off. I was so tired of not having adequate supervision. Staff meetings weekly where she yelled at us and invariably someone cried due to the stress and lack of support, and not having been paid enough to do everything I was doing in their job. I refused. I was told to do it or I would be fired. Nope. So I got fired. On the way out to my car, I called my former director who had moved to another agency. She set up an interview for the next day and I had a new job within 24 hours. She asked me what had happened at that interview. I spilled all the tea. Her sister-in-law was on the board of the previous agency. So she called her and I told her everything. 2. Director was fired and supervisor was reprimanded and put on close monitoring. She had killed any chance of promotion and left shortly afterwards. I heard. I was just happy to have jumped ship from that toxic mess. I should have left months earlier. Not my story but my mother's. I watched on the sidelines as a teenager. My mother's job was basically a professional fundraiser. I really don't know what else to call it. People came to her for help raise money for nonprofits or other foundations that needed it. This was a long time ago before social workers were more of a mandatory thing at high schools. My high school was very poor and did not have one. So my mother took it upon herself to set up a fundraiser to pay the salary of a social worker so my high school could have one. After raising all the money, she went to talk to the principal who flat out refused to take any of it and said the position just wasn't necessary. My mother was pretty upset and just decided she would donate the money to supplies or something like that. I honestly have no idea what she did with it, but it did go to some sort of charity. After a few months, at a Christmas party, the superintendent of all the public schools in the area was at the same party and he struck up a conversation with my mother. After some small talk, my mother said that it was such a shame that principal didn't take the money for the social worker's position. The superintendent was dumbstruck and then told her that he had ordered principal to find funding for that position, and when superintendent asked him about it he replied with, "No one is interested in that and we just couldn't get the money for it." Needless to say, he lost his position, and whenever we came back from the holiday break the school was hiring for his position. Management was giving an injured worker shit. Not wanting to pay him. Accusing him of gold-bricking. Worker said, "Tell you what. Do the right thing here or you will be sorry." Management said take your best shot. Worker called the EPA and APCD. Told them where to find the logs that showed discrepancies in toxic material storage and usage. Sheriff's deputies showed up and raided the offices. Field supervisors from 10 years ago that had retired got subpoenaed. It was epic. Cost the company massively in fines and remediation, all because you wanted to fuck with one poor bastard. Edit. Since there may be some question around how all of this could happen in the age of electronic reporting. Here's the story. It's not all the story, of course. The news never does quite get all the story. Since it's in the LA Times, I'm not worried about privacy. However, it was a state agency that was called. The EPA became involved later and at another site. It's been a few years and the chronology of events gets recalled incorrectly sometimes. Once you appear on a regulator's radar, you better have your shit tight. https www.latimes.com archives le xpm the 21st of March 1994 mn 367882 story. HTML. He was always slacking off. He'd go and do a 15-minute task and be gone 2 hours. He'd have to shoot off early for a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment, always with no prior warning and whenever he was obviously bored. This was, mind you, within weeks of the new shop opening and all of us being hired. I was young and went along with it for a while. My colleague was in her 40s and vaguely knew him anyway. So was not standing for it. She reported him repeatedly to our area manager, who decided to come down to speak to him about it. AM rung in the morning, told him to stay in the shop today, and send one of us out for anything that needed doing. He said he had something to do, but his boss said nope. Need you in the shop. Somehow he didn't get the obvious message and went out anyway. The AM came down and he was gone. My manager wouldn't answer his phone all day. AM was pissed. At the end of the day when we were closing up, he walked past, posted his keys through the door, and I never saw him again. Didn't even attempt to argue his case. I used math to prove to their superior how severely my boss had underestimated turnover 3+ years in a row, costing a ton of money and labor issues. One day earlier the boss had screamed at my team until his face went purple, making a huge spectacle in front of the entire floor. The gist was that we were colluding against the company by a handful of us, electing not to renew our contracts. Came back with graphs and maths. Baby. He was demoted and transferred out a couple weeks later. Pro tip. Don't make a grumpy scapegoat out of someone who loves to make Excel graphs. I had proven myself as a competent management-level employee. She, on the other hand, showed favoritism, broke rules, set schedules nobody could work, and all around didn't give a shit as assistant manager. When the manager left, she assumed she was a shoo-in. After all, she was the assistant manager, so why wouldn't she be promoted? We both got called into a meeting. The district uppity up told us both that I was going to be the new manager, and she lost her shit. I never saw her again. And quickly after, all her relatives that worked there quit mysteriously. Was the head chef of a small restaurant that I eventually owned, before my life collapsed. But that's another story. The owner, who was rarely there, suspected the general manager of stealing on quiet nights if she thought she wasn't asking enough on tips. Place was small enough that on slow nights it was just the two of us working. She would go to the computer from the manager's screen and delete any tables that were paid in cash, pocketing the money. I got suspicious when my food cost numbers would just never add up to what was being sold. So I got a hold of the software Compa-Y, then ran out computer system, and it turns out they have a backdoor that even the management can't see that logs every single keystroke. Turns out she had ripped off close to $20,000 over a 6-month period. She was asked to leave after that, but for some reason the owner didn't bother to press charges. For a while I was a project manager who got moved around from project to project as a fixer. I was moved to a project where the customer just could not be satisfied, no matter how many people, how much attention, how we bent over for them. Our program's director, who should have been our advocate, would not manage the customer, and instead just hammered his employees to do more. People on our team were being let go due to failure, or quitting outright due to burnout. And he was bitching that he couldn't get good people. Because of my sort of special position as General Dogsbody, I happened to have the ear of our VP, and this project came up in casual conversation. I mentioned that it seemed funny that if the director was doing his job, how so many employees that we knew by fact and reputation were good employees had failed. A week later I heard that the director had been let go, and nothing of value was lost. Our manager spent her whole shift in the office watching us on camera, and if we so much as stopped to talk to each other she'd come out and yell at us to get back to work. She was completely immature. One time I left my water bottle at the front counter and my co-worker had to stop her from purposefully throwing it away. She would make up rules on the spot if she didn't like something someone did. I could go on. She was a terrible, unfriendly, hypocritical, mean manager. Honestly, We all just went to the owners and told them everything and how it made us feel. They got HR involved and got her fired and found out she may have been stealing or giving away product. It was such a relief. If you work for a small business, just be honest with the owners if management isn't family. I got my boss disbarred. He was an attorney who was a serial sexual abuser of female clients, criminal defendants. He got away with it for over 20 years and preyed upon at least 12 different victims. The Office of Attorney Regulation censured him multiple times for other offenses, like being late to pay his annual bar fees. But even though they knew about at least 5 of the victims, they wouldn't disbar him. I discovered that the Office of Attorney Regulation decides whether to pursue an action against an attorney based on a cost-benefit analysis. I gathered as much documentation of everything as I could over a 6-month period.